looking for escapism, I just want to escape.
Welcome back to my disembodied voice. In today's video, we are going to look at one of my favourite serial killer movies of all time, but more specifically, one of my favourite antagonists in terms of his backstory, presentation and complex psychological makeup. I am, of course, talking about Carl Stargher in the movie The Cell. Now, I love The Cell and I think the idea is amazing, the visuals are incredible and the whole feel of it is fresh and original. I even liked Vince Vaughn in it, which is saying something. Jennifer Lopez is passable as the psychologist who enters Stargher's mind, but it's far from my favourite role of hers. That would be when she was Matt Schatz's wife in the Saturday Night Live home makeover skit.
God, I still can't believe we won!
It's Smurfing crazy. This is awesome.
Anyway, just to let you know, we are going to be talking about sexual violence today with some descriptions of domestic violence and child abuse. So if these are trigger words, that's your final warning. Anyway, let's crack on. Quick overview. The Cell is about Jennifer Lopez's doctor-type person who enters the minds of her young patients to help them recover from trauma. When the police catch notorious serial killer Carl Stargher, he is catatonic and unlikely to ever wake up again due to having a fit of some sort, which means there is still one woman out there trapped in his demonic prison called The Cell, where she will slowly drown over the coming hours if the police don't get to her. Therefore, Jennifer Lopez has to enter Carl Stargher's mind and hopefully get him to tell her where the woman is. You see, Carl has a really rare form of schizophrenia called Whelan's infarction, which was caused by an in utero infection and means that, due to having a seizure whilst being held underwater once when he was very young, he is now deeply triggered by water in general, and so his seizures were getting worse until the one that happened before the police caught him was the last one he was ever destined to have. He's virtually brain dead, catatonic, never ever waking up. His issues with water are also part of the reason he has rings in his bag and likes to be suspended while pleasuring himself over the women he captures because it feels like he's floating. Anyway, more on that later. Directed by Tarsum Singh, who also directed the bizarre but brilliant REM video Losing My Religion, the film is all imagery and horror as we descend into Carl's mind, meet the terrified child within, and also the godlike ideal of Carl's self, which is so monstrous it now rules his catatonic head. Now, I could delve into multiple aspects, but that would take me forever, so instead we are going to focus on Carl's sexual dysfunction, how this was created, how it manifests and relates to his treatment of women, and how his abuse has moulded his dysfunctions into something which ultimately led him to start killing. So let's start at the beginning. Following his underwater seizure when he was very young, Carl began hearing a voice which was his only friend at the time of a very troubling childhood. Sadly for Carl, he lived with an abusive father who broke his ribs, jaw and generally pummeled him for very minor misdemeanours or no reason at all. Due to his isolation and loneliness, Carl began playing with dolls as a form of escape, but once his father found out, and seen in the movie's most difficult scene, forced him to stare at his current partner's genitals, state he would not raise a faggot, and then burns him horrifically with an iron. Carl's father also informs us in this scene that Carl's real mother ran away, women are evil, and states all private parts of women are a place of evil. Carl's particular methods of killing women, and then gratifying himself via masturbating over their corpses, started from when he found an injured bird, but, afraid his father would torment it, drowned the animal to spare its suffering. So water and drowning have been recurring themes for Carl, from when he was born, right up to the point where he becomes virtually brain dead. Anyway, following finally making a career in industry, Carl was able to construct The Cell, which was a fully automated cube of glass and steel which, once a woman was placed inside it, would slowly fill with water over 48 hours. Carl would film the woman's slow demise and, once the woman had died, she would be cleaned in bleach, laid on a table, and then Carl would hoist himself up via the rings which were implanted into his flesh so he could simulate floating and finally relieve himself sexually via hand stimulation over the corpse. Played brilliantly by Vincent D'Onofrio. Played brilliantly by the guy who played Kingpin in Daredevil, Carl Stargher is the personification of how a psyche can become twisted, malformed and warped through inescapable and systematic abuse and, through journeying inside his mind, the twisted ego, dystonic ideals and warped compartmentalization are all done superbly. The doll issue is the first thing we're going to grapple with as, forced to play with dolls as a child as a method of escapism and company, the women are killed and then sterilised partly because they need to resemble a doll before he can relieve himself. Also, dolls are the one congruent and consistent set of imagery inside his corrosive mental pathways and the thing which connects the two personalities which are warring inside Carl's head. Carl's younger, more childlike self is the introvert, the one who cannot speak or talk to people and is still a little boy who is scared. The second is the current dominant personality, an ego now syntonic with power, rage and dominion, and the transferred manifestation of the ideal that seeks revenge, projects sadism, and gives Carl an inflated sense of power. However, peppered throughout Carl's head are mutilated dolls. And in the real world, he turns women into dolls when he kills them, and this imprint from his childhood is one of the gluten's of his psyche. When we are young, our early attachments in terms of secure bonding with parents also lay the groundwork for how we reach our sexual milestones. For example, in histrionic personality disorder, it's believed that, in girls at least, this begins when the child develops beyond their playing with dolls phase and a sexual conflict forms between father and daughter. So, once acting cute to get daddy's attention moves into acting sexually aggressive to harness boy's attention, repression occurs within the father-daughter relationship and is manifested through hypersexualization and a constant morphing of behaviour. Basically, and in layman terms, in terms of attention and closeness, there are deficits and tropes from childhood which change in adulthood, but once cute girl becomes overtly sexualised, the repression is never truly overcome. For Carl, playing with dolls made him truly happy and enabled him to feel comfortable, but as his father accused him of being gay and beat him for playing with dolls, as well as forcing the very young boy to imprint an early sexual connotation of women being dirty, evil, and then being forced to connect a graphic close-up image of a woman's genitals with something forbidden, Carl's frigidity means he is more likely a virgin when he suffers the seizure which will ultimately kill him. So, desperate to bond with other people but chronically shy, emotionally malformed and failing to meet developmental milestones, the dolls represent his happiest time when he was young, but also an inanimate object he can bond with as he has no emotional grounding from his parents and an introverted and deeply scarred boy, both mentally and physically, is terrified of women in both what they represent and the company that they can give. Even when drowning his penultimate victim, when he visits the cell for extraction, the corpse twitches slightly and Carl runs for cover and doesn't look as if being admonished by his father. He sits there in the corner, refusing to look at what might be alive because it's just wrong. He shouldn't look at it. It shouldn't be like that. It needs to be dead. The woman needs to be a doll. It's a dichotomy which the film plays out really well, as what we have throughout are themes of the introvert and extrovert against aggressive, sadist, scared, gentle boy who just wants to be loved but has no concept of the emotion. Forever left as seeing women as dirty, dangerous and evil, which have been reinforced with beatings and seeing a strange woman's genitals up close when he was very, very young, his desire for human connection is forever tainted and the only female-looking thing he could ever bond with is a doll. So, repressing his sexual urges and unable to go near the evil parts of a woman's body, Carl turns his victims into dolls, then elevates himself for floating and masochism and also to put some distance between him and his conquest before relieving himself sexually. It's important to remember that, when we are young, our phenomenal field is imprinted by the experiences and relationships which help form our sense of identity. For Carl, playing with dolls made him happy, but even more so, the dolls were representations of people which didn't hurt him and he could also manipulate and live an ideal life with. They were fantasy, friendly, kind, enabled his gentle side to come out, like it does with the bird he finds and the dog he cares for in his adult life, and also they were his only friends. However, hideously mutilated and scarred by his father from repeated abuse and repeated beatings, Carl grows up in isolation from other people and, once he hits the age where sexual identity forms, his concepts of sex and women are torn between the dichotomies of his personality. From the childlike side, women are dirty, disgusting, and dangerous, and any sexual thoughts are infused with connotations of pain, violence, and disgust. Yet, also from childhood, when he drowned the bird, it's important that the women are drowned because this symbolises being put out of their misery, and it's also merciful. So, although the godlike sadism side enables Carl to kill women in the first place, even that is done with a dyad, as they are drowned for over 48 hours, which means they suffer immensely, but there's also an element of kindness, as he doesn't strangle or just beat them to death. Yes, Carl more than likely watches the tapes of them drowning, and more than likely for another form of sexual pleasure, but that is through a screen of detachment, and he can act as a voyeur. He doesn't go into the room to hear them beg, and isn't near them until they have drowned. He also cleans them afterwards, which shows a stark paradox to his brutality of abduction and then the sadism of a slow and painful death. Now, this paradox is also common amongst people who self-harm, as one of the things someone will do after they cut themselves is to then care, bandage and tend to the wounds. It's part of the ritual which goes through the cycle of anger, harm, cutting, through to caring and nurturing, and the same can be said for Stargher. He kidnaps and slowly drowns someone because he is cruel, but once the woman is dead, she is cleaned, cared for and treated with reverence before he commits his sexual release. Much like in his head, where this is an ego ideal of a monster and a caring young boy, Stargher's personality is a riddle of contradictions where he cudgels, kills, and then cares once the body is in its doll-like form. Stargher is a world of paradoxes, anger, kindness, you name it, it's all mixed in. Now, Carl may well have a galmatophilia, which is the sexual attraction to dolls and mannequins, but I think his relationship sexually with women and dolls is more complex than just that. To Carl, it's not just that he prefers dolls, but isolated, virginal, and with messages of how dirty and evil women are imbued through his head via punches and burns from his father, the mental imprint upon the schemata of his personality and warping of his phenomenal field means that whilst he has become the monster his father moulded him into, along with the problems of his schizophrenia, the little boy inside and the young sexualised man that has natural urges, wants and needs can only get those when women are deceased and inanimate like a doll. Carl Stargher is evil. I mean, after all, he tortures people to death, masturbates over their dead bodies and then dumps them afterwards. But saying evil is a reductive approach, and we have to remember that he was made into this monster by his father. Also, due to his childhood imprinting and the connotations of joy that dolls bring, which has now morphed through something sexual, his motives are also a dichotomy to be scrutinised. First of all, he kills women. So yeah, he kills women. But this is done so he can begin a transformation process into something he can touch for release, love and care. Secondly, Carl loves his dog, and once inside the mindscape, he also tries to save Jennifer Lopez, so there are signs of atonement and the agony of being trapped by a much more dominant and hateful personality. However, when it comes to sex, Carl was never going to have a normal relationship with anyone after his childhood of trauma. He also has a severe mental illness which would be comorbid with the personality disorder from a lifetime of abuse, and that would need to be taken into account if you were doing a proper, clinical, detailed case study on him. Children of abuse have been known in later life to associate pain with eroticism, and Carl's rings in his back is certainly a sign of this. His dominant personality is also something constructed to protect him from the world or enable him to be strong enough to create the perfect doll partner, as, although closeness with his toys as a child was associated with weakness and gayness, his strong personality is also serving the incohesive whole where Carl's needs must be met, and to do this, someone has to catch and kill the women. It's not that Carl has dissociative identity disorder, or once called split personality disorder, it's just that a parental superego has formed into the sadist god to also counterbalance the masochistic and gentle child, and, in harmony, these two sides are always at war. Even that sentence is a paradox, which, again, when we come to Carl, everything is a paradox that somehow enables the whole to work. A vessel of pure evil who really didn't start out as evil. He was just malformed into something which is lonely, angry, frightened and vengeful, and what he could have been and the relationships he could have had were taken away from him by his father, who tortured him into a frigid, lonely and then truly lethal monster. Anyway, that's it for this week's video, and remember, psychology is cool. So please like, share and subscribe, or leave a comment or even a suggestion for a future video. And until next time, I'll catch you later.
God, I still can't believe we won.
Smurfing crazy. This is awesome.